In this video, we're going to be looking at part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. We'll be looking at a task card for this part of the test, and we won't be looking at a full sample answer in this video, but we'll be going through the planning stage for this type of task. I want to do this just so I can kind of show you the steps that I would go through and I tell my students to go through when they're planning for part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. You probably know already that the examiner gives you 1 minute preparation time in the test to speak for between 1 and 2 minutes after they ask you to start speaking. Now, this video is hopefully going to help you to kind of think about how you're going to go through this planning process, and I'm going to show you some of my own ideas for a specific task card. So let's get on with it. The task card we're going to look at is this one. Now, this task card comes from one of the Cambridge books, so it's quite reliable. It's the kind of task that does come up in part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. You can see there it's asking you to describe a tourist attraction you enjoyed visiting. So the focus is a place. You've got to describe this place that you've been to in the past. The focus is the past because it's somewhere you enjoyed visiting, right? You can see they're using the past tenses in that line at the top of the task card. And then we've got those 4 cues underneath. What this tourist attraction is, when and why you visited it, what you did there, and explain why you enjoyed visiting this tourist attraction. So we've got to try and go through all 4 of those cues. You don't have to, but it's really a good idea to follow this structure in your speaking. It makes it kind of flow better and connect better and kind of helps you to talk about different things and not just repeat yourself. You can see one of those cues actually is focused on the present tense, what this tourist attraction is. Well, because the tourist attraction probably still exists now. But most of this task, we're going to be focusing on using the past tenses. Now, when I get a task card like this, what we really have to do is firstly think about ideas. If you don't have enough ideas, then you're not going to be able to speak for the full 2 minutes. So first of all, I'll think of at least one idea for each of those cues. Now, it's likely that that could at first take you a full minute just to do that. But if you have some extra time after you've come up with an idea for each of those cues, then you can start adding some ideas about some maybe extra vocabulary that you can use when you're explaining those ideas that follow the 4 cues. So, first of all, I've got to think about that first cue and what my answer would be, or what my idea would be for that first cue. What this tourist attraction is. So for me, the tourist attraction I enjoyed visiting in the past was a place called the Masai Mara National Reserve. Now, this is a massive national reserve in a country called Kenya in Africa. So I would just write down that phrase, Masai Mara National Reserve. And that would be the main idea. Of course, when I'm speaking in the 1 to 2 minutes the examiner gives me, I would expand a lot on that and kind of describe it in as much detail as I can. Now, if we move to the second cue, and really this is 2 in 1 here, when and why you visited it. So we've got to have an idea for when and also an idea for why. Now, it's quite simple. When, this was when I was 18 years old, so I would write down 18 years old. And then why? Well, I was on my gap year in between high school and university. So I would write down gap year. So we got a few words there to remind us of our idea, and then we can go into more detail when we're speaking in front of the examiner or just practicing. Then the next cue, which is what you did there. Now, really what I did there, the main thing was to go on safari. So you get driven around in some kind of jeep and you can see all the different animals and views that are on offer in the Masai Mara National Reserve. So all I would do there is write down the word safari, but of course go into more detail when I'm speaking about it in the full answer. That leaves me with the final cue, which is explain why you enjoyed visiting this tourist attraction. Now we need some good ideas down here because of course this part really focuses on your feelings about something, why you enjoyed visiting it. So you're going to be focusing on using lots of good adjectives in this final cue. It's why it's a good idea to reach that final cue when you're in the test. You don't have to, but it's really a good idea to get to that last one. So why I enjoyed. There's a couple of things, a couple of ideas I can write down here. Now, one thing was the landscape, and I would describe it as wild and rugged. So that's what I would write down there. Wild, rugged landscape. So you can see those two adjectives there I'm using to describe the landscape. Also, I'd write down something about the animals too. Now, the animals were incredible. So I would write down incredible animals. So already I've got some useful vocabulary there as well as the main ideas. So those are the 4 ideas that I've got to match with the 4 cues on the task card. And of course, you should be thinking about, well, what would your 4 ideas be for those 4 cues on the task card? This is kind of the process that you want to be going through when you're preparing answers for this part of the test. Now, it's quite likely, especially when you first start kind of practicing planning for these types of tasks, that will be all you can do in the space of 1 minute. But of course, in practice times, that you're going to give yourself longer than that. And hopefully, as you get closer to going to the real test, it will be more manageable to push yourself to do a little bit more in terms of planning when you're practicing using just that 1 minute. Now, if you do have a bit more time, it's good to think of some good vocabulary that you can use when you're explaining your ideas. So what I'll do now is just quickly, for each of those ideas, come up with a bit of extra vocabulary that I can use when I'm explaining those ideas. Now, the first idea was the Masai Mara National Reserve. Well, I can have some phrases that I can use that will describe that national reserve a bit more. Now, of course, there's plenty you can do in terms of research on the internet to find out some useful vocabulary, or just write down vocabulary that you already know. So for me, I've got the phrase first, rolling savanna plains. Now, this is a phrase that describes the landscape inside the reserve, rolling savanna plains. So that's a nice phrase to use to describe this place. Also, I might add the phrase breathtaking vistas. Now, breathtaking vistas, this would be, well, amazing views. That's what it really means here. But another really nice phrase that shows a bit higher level vocabulary, less common words for non-native speakers to know. So I'm going to add that to my vocabulary. Then if I move to the second idea, which was about when and why I visited, well, when 18 years old, and the why going on a gap year. What I'll do first here is just make sure that I'm using some phrasal verbs, idiomatic language, which is a requirement if you want to get band 7 or above. So I'm going to write down went on. I was just about to say go on then, but I remember, well, we're talking about something that happened in the past, so we're going to say went on. And this is just a phrasal verb which we use with trips or holidays or, well, a gap year. I went on a gap year. So nothing too complex there, but I just want to remind myself to try to use some idiomatic language. Also, maybe we can describe that gap year or my feeling when I was on that gap year. And I could use an adjective like adventurous. I was feeling really adventurous. So maybe writing down that word, making sure I remember to use it when I'm describing the gap year that I went on. Then the third idea, which was what I did there, well, it was a safari. So we can think of a couple of phrases to describe that safari. One could be a bumpy ride. Now, when you're in these Jeeps, the ride when you're in the Jeep will not be a smooth, flat road. It will be quite bumpy. And that's one memory I have from that safari. So a bumpy ride. Also, something a bit extra, maybe a short story that I can tell for this cue was when we saw a leopard hunting its prey and we actually saw it catch an antelope. And it was pretty exciting. But that will be something I can describe in more detail. I mean, I'll just make sure I'm using a couple of words that I need to kind of remind myself of that story. So I might write down leopard hunting. So there we go. That brings us to the final idea for the final cue, which was to explain why you enjoyed visiting this tourist attraction. Well, we've got the idea of the landscape and the animals. Let's just get some more vocabulary that can describe the landscape and animals. So the first phrase I might use is awe-inspiring views. Now, this is a phrase that we can use to describe that landscape, those views. A nice adjective, awe-inspiring. Really a synonym of incredible or amazing. And then also to describe the animals in more detail, we could say majestic creatures. Creatures instead of animals, and majestic there instead of incredible. Now, majestic is one of those adjectives that we might use to describe elephants or rhinos in the safari park. So there we go. You can see there I've got the ideas and I've got some vocabulary to use when I'm explaining those ideas. This is just the planning stage. Now you can see that has taken me a lot longer than just 1 minute to go through. But it is possible with practice to come up with ideas and vocabulary within that 1 minute preparation time if you practice a lot and you already have some ideas that you've prepared before you go into the test that you can quickly be writing down. A lot of preparation can be done for part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. So why don't you give it a try and see what your ideas and vocabulary are for this task. Now, in the next video that I'm going to put up, I will be giving the full sample answer following this planning stage. But that will be in next week's video. We're not going to do that now. Why don't you go away and have a think about your response first and maybe practice giving a response to this task card. So there we go. Hopefully this was useful for you and you enjoyed watching the video. If you did, then remember to click the like button. And if you haven't already, then remember to click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any similar videos to this in the future. There we go. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.